With the announcement of the UEFA Women's Europa Cup, we're here to discuss it. We show you how the competition is going to work, who is likely to qualify for it, and whether it's a good idea or not. This is what we know so far on the Women's Europa Cup. Alright, let's talk about the Women's Europa Cup then, the debut competition this year in 25-26 of a second tier of women's European continental action. Harry, I think there's a lot of hype coming into this with the announcement of this only a few months ago. What's your reaction? Because UEFA have put out how the competition is going to work. What's your initial reaction to that?
I think it was, as you say, everyone was excited about getting a new competition. We're very intrigued to see what it was going to be. I think it's not quite what anyone expected, myself included. I don't think that we thought we were going to get what we have got. But overall, I think I like the idea of it. New competitions are always going to be fun. It's an opportunity for someone to win silverware at the end of the day, and that's always be a good thing. But it was surprising. It wasn't what I expected.
Yeah, and so a crucial part of that is the fact it's called the Europa Cup rather than the Champions League or Europa League, something like that, which implies there is a knockout competition. So let's talk about what the competition is then. So it will be starting this season, the inaugural season for the 25-26 campaign. There'll be 16 teams in the competition. As I say, it will be a knockout competition, so no group stage before, obviously, the knockouts. And the final is two-legged. So a lot of weird things in there. It's been a while since we've seen a European competition be exclusively knockout.
Yeah.
That's quite a fun niche thing, though, isn't it?
It is, and it's in that sense, it's more like a domestic cup competition, but across Europe. And for me, that's quite a positive thing.
Higher stakes, I think.
Yeah, very, very interesting. I think things like home advantage are going to be absolutely crucial in these kind of ties. But yeah, so very exciting to see I don't mind the group stage because it's you get 6 games. You get like we have in the Champions League this year. You get Barcelona and Man City playing each other twice. You get Arsenal and Bayern Munich playing each other twice. But knockout competitions are always fun. Look at we've had some brilliant FA Cups and Subway Cups in England, and obviously around Europe we get really good domestic cups. So a domestic cup for European clubs is pretty cool.
Yeah, the two-legged final aspect, though, I don't think I can ever get behind a two-legged final. Perhaps, obviously, in the men's game we have the National League, and that has a two-legged final, I think, doesn't it? The playoffs of that competition. So, is it not? There's only one now. But there are some competitions. I don't think two-legged finals really work. Play at a neutral venue, play one final. That's what makes a final special. The fact that it is just 90 minutes.
Yeah, when you reach a final, it's your date with destiny. You have 90 minutes to beat one other side at football to win a trophy. I understand two-legged finals because you could lose the first leg of the final 1-0 and it could mean absolutely nothing. And there's so many things. That's not how finals are done. Finals are one moment, one match, absolutely brilliant football, and it's all on the line. And my other thing I don't like with it is it kind of prevents upsets, because in a final, if a weaker side can beat a stronger side over 90 minutes, the chance they do that over 180 minutes is very rare. So if we do get two sides where one is a big underdog, they might have put up a really good defensive performance for 90 minutes, but then they've got to do it in another game, and by that point, they could end up getting hammered, and I think it would ruin the chance of us getting a really exciting and shocking final.
I think overall it just ruins the spectacle. It makes the whole occasion less important. I think it's a really weird decision from UEFA as well, because UEFA's standpoint is money, and so playing 2 games is probably better than one. However, the eyes and the attention, I think, on just one game would be bigger than if it's over 2 legs. I think if someone goes, this is the first leg of the Europa Cup final, it'll go, I'll just wait for the second one.
Yeah, and especially if it's 0-0, then it's completely pointless. If there's no goals in that game, it is a completely pointless game.
But I think it will be nervy because, on one hand, teams will go, we can go for it because we can always make up for it next week. But equally, I think some teams will go, if we just hold on now, we'll go win it next week. That, for me, is a really difficult, a weird decision to make it a two-legged final.
And it's a hard place to be a player in that instance as well, because you go out there, you treat it like a final, but if you come off the pitch 2-0 up, you then got to go into a very similar game, but you're already winning, and it's very hard to get that mindset across of it's another final. I think as a player, you have to treat it like 2 finals. You have to separate them both and take this one is a final, this one's a separate final, and and whatever the outcome is at the end of that. But it's a difficult one for the fans. I think it's less exciting, and for the players and the managers, it's harder to deal with.
Yeah, and as you made a point about the fact that you might have an underdog against an overdog or an expected winner. In that scenario, if the stronger side there wins 5-0, for example, in the first final, what's the point in playing the second leg?
Yes.
Suddenly, no one really cares because that's not getting overturned anytime soon. So I think it's going to be really interesting. Let's have a look at where we're getting these teams from then, because there's 16 teams in the competition, split into 13 teams who will automatically qualify based on their placings in their domestic leagues, and then 3 teams coming from Champions League qualifying, getting knocked out of that. And when we look at how those teams, or where they come from, to the 13 teams are the third place teams in the domestic league from associations ranked 8 to 13, and the runners-up of associations ranked 18th to 24th. And I will dummy who these teams will be so it becomes clearer and easier to understand. But that is the UEFA coefficient rankings, which attributes a number to each nation based on how well their teams have performed in Europe over the last 5 years. So it's weird for me to start with, 8 to 13, and then 18 to 24. What did associations 14 to 17 do wrong? That includes associations like Albania and Scotland. So Scotland, at the moment, they'd be in a better position to get Europa Cup football if they were to not play in Europe for a few years and get knocked down to 18th.
Yes, so those teams because
there's just 4 nations in the middle there that aren't involved. Surely, just don't use 21 to 24 and instead use 14 to 17.
That
would make more sense to me. But alas, we have Belarus and we don't have Scotland. Odd decision from UEFA again. The 3 teams coming from the Champions League, though, will be a limit in the Champions League third qualifying round, along with runners-up and third place teams from the second qualifying round, and they will enter the tournament via a seeding system. So typically wishy-washy vocabulary from UEFA, not much clarity in this, but I take it to be that the highest coefficient teams knocked out of the Champions League will go into the Europa Cup.
They'll be fed in.
Fed in, yes, one at a time. But my problem with that is you're going to have some really good teams getting knocked out of the Champions League play against ranked 24th association, which I believe is like Romania, and that becomes a big disparity.
Yeah, especially when you look at, I know we'll model it in a minute, but when you look at who got knocked out of the Champions League this year in the playoffs, that's teams like PSG. That's teams like Atletico Madrid. Yeah. And if you throw those against, no offence to the Romanian league, but if you put PSG up against a team in the Romanian league, there's only one winner of that football match, and it's PSG by an absolute landslide. And it is just really weird. We're missing 3 random leagues in the middle there on one side, and you're going to get 4, and you can get some really difficult sides coming through from the other side of the feeding system. It's a really weird setup.
Yeah, so I've dummied it. So the graphic on screen now shows what the Europa Cup could look like. So this takes the 3 highest coefficient teams to be knocked out of the Champions League qualifiers, and it takes the 13 teams in the Europa who are third or second in their leagues right now. Some interesting ones in there, though, because you've got from the Icelandic division, I'm going to have to get the name up here, but it is Tindastóll. Now, quite interestingly, the Icelandic division has 4 teams in it. The bottom 2 get relegated, and now second in that league is going to be getting automatic qualification into a European competition. That for me shows where the issue can arise, because basically, if you stay up but don't win the league, you're in the Europa Cup.
And then when you look at it, there's leagues like Scotland who aren't in it, who could not be in it for some reason, where you could have someone like a Glasgow City or a Rangers or a Hearts or a Celtic or a Hibernian, but instead you're going to have a team that are. That again in the Icelandic, they're fighting between relegation and Europe. There's no in between. What a mental season. But yeah, there's some aspects of this that just make no sense.
Yeah, so let's run through some of those teams then in case people don't recognise the badges. You've got Rosenborg, you've got SC Utrecht, you've got First Vienna, who are currently third in the Austrian division.
Better than Second Vienna.
You've got Slovako, you've got Metalist 1925 Kharkiv, you've got Brondby, obviously Tindastóll I mentioned, Spartak Subotica, Minsk, and then these are the 4 that I don't really get because I just use 14, 17, but alas, we've got Anderlecht from Belgium, Olimpia Ljubljana, you've got Osijek from Croatia, and SIK Zreda MC. There's a lot of teams here who just won't be able to compete with those top dogs, and if you consider that at the moment it's PSG, Atletico Madrid, and Ajax in with those 13 teams, you've got to consider you already know the semi-finals there, unless they meet each other early in the tournament.
And this is where our problem comes with it. Basically, from what it looks like at the moment, it is a competition built to give the 3 teams that get knocked from the Champions League a chance to win a trophy. It's really, really bizarre.
But there's no competition there, because what you could easily do here is, if you consider all of the teams who weren't in the Champions League this season, so if you were to say, I don't know, you could brainstorm 16 teams, but to throw out some names, you've got Manchester United, who didn't even qualify for the qualifiers. You could put BK Häcken in there, Fiorentina, Paris FC, the aforementioned Atletico Madrid, PSG, Ajax. You've got Eintracht Frankfurt. You've got Anderlecht. That's already their 9 teams. You only have to come up with another 7 that are fairly competitive. And, even if they're teams like Nordjylland, who perhaps won't be right at the sharp end, you can have, Rosenborg in there. You can have FC Utrecht, those 2 would qualify as it stands. You could have, just scrolling through the list of teams that didn't quite make it, you have Brøndby, Sparta Prague. It could be Linköping, Benfica. That, for me, sounds like such a more interesting competition. I get the inclusion of these smaller teams, because I think in terms of sharing the revenue, in terms of building the women's game in other countries, that makes a load of sense. But in that case, I would question, why not bring in a Conference League type system and have a competitive Europa League? And I know people will say, well, we don't have enough teams to have 3 competitions, but run a competition of the Conference League where you've got the smaller teams competing and they are given airtime, and you have a couple bigger teams in there perhaps. And then a Europa League which is genuinely competitive and gives another chance at a European trophy. Because when the Europa League was announced, I think a lot of people looked at it and went, well, this is a nice opportunity, because there's a lot of big teams who've just not had a chance to win European trophies because Barcelona and Lyon are too dominant. Yeah. And Wolfsburg, to be fair, as well. I've got a few in there. But I think there's a lot of teams who love a chance at silverware, European glory, European silverware, but that's simply not achievable with the Champions League. This Europa League is going to hand an opportunity to a couple teams to do that. But I don't think it's going to be a very interesting competition to watch until the final. And then it's 2-legged. And
even if you didn't put the Champions League teams in there, who were the 8th team? Was it Rosenborg, the 8th in the 8th league team on the left side? They'd walk it. They might
be a good competition between them and Utrecht, I reckon.
But apart from that,
maybe.
when Rosenborg rock up on the 24th, ranked league runners up, they're going to absolutely tank them. And that's the problem with it, is that there's just such a disparity even between the teams that get through the league phase. But when we first heard about this, we thought we were going to see we could have a competition where you've got PSG, Man United, Atletico Madrid, Frankfurt, all Benfica, all fighting it out for a European glory. Now we're going to have 3 massive teams trounce a load of smaller teams and then just have a competitive final.
Yeah, it is worth saying as well that this UEFA coefficient is subject to change.
Yes.
So this will, Celtic have got to the Champions League proper this season. So there's a good chance that we'll see, as a result, the Scottish League coefficient rise, and some other leagues will drop off once we get to the end of the season, because it's over a 5-year period. So teams that did well 5 years ago that perhaps haven't done as well this year will go down, and teams that have done better this year than they did 5 years ago will go up. So it is subject to change, and it may be slightly more competitive. This was just to give a sort of broad outline of what it might look like. But I think there's so much opportunity here with this Europa League competition, it just feels like it's being wasted. It just feels like it doesn't feel... Europa League was supposed to be an interesting competitive tournament to go alongside the Champions League. But now it looks more like a pity trophy for a handful of Champions League teams that weren't lucky enough to make it.
It feels more... I get more a feeling of like it's the FA Trophy equivalent to the FA Cup. It's a smaller cup for the smaller teams just to have something to fight for, because they're never going to stand a chance of winning the big main trophy. And that's not how it should be. We should have 2 really competitive tournaments, and that's why the Conference League in the men's game was developed, to give a chance to smaller teams. Yeah. So I do think it's bizarre, and there's a lot of elements that for me need working on and need refining. Whether UEFA will do that, probably not, because they're not going to go back on their work, are they? And it's quite disappointing, because it's not what we expected, it's not what we wanted. And obviously it's a really good opportunity for those smaller teams, but for me it's not the right competition to do it in.
This does feel like it goes against UEFA's principles of just making as much money as possible, though. Yeah. Because I think they'd make more money if they put like Benfica and all the teams I mentioned a moment ago in. The other thing worth noting as well is with the Champions League teams, where the Champions League is expanding to 18 teams, so another 2 teams will qualify through the qualifiers. Now, if you say, it's not exact science, but if you say, for example, that's PSG and Atletico Madrid, suddenly even the teams getting knocked down from the Champions League qualifiers will probably be Ajax, Frankfurt, Benfica. Not bad teams, but it's a drop off from PSG and Atletico Madrid already.
It does make it more that works slightly better in terms of being more competitive. Like I could see Rosenborg getting something against Benfica or that, but I think it goes too deep because that Rosenborg, Utrecht, they can put up a decent fight, but the teams down at the very bottom of the thing aren't going to stand a chance of laying a finger on Frankfurt and teams like that. And that's the issue, is that I think towards the sharp end of the competition it could get quite tasty and be quite entertaining, but those, depending on what the draw is, those first couple of knockout rounds are going to be pretty dull.
Yeah, it also depends on how they're doing this seeding, because the feeding the teams in based on seeding rankings is just UEFA nonsense. How we are doing that, I have no idea.
Which, I mean,
more qualifiers.
My best interpretation, though, could potentially be that they feed them in later into the knockouts to avoid them just like pacing teams.
No, because they've got qualification rounds, which I believe will be.
For?
I think that's the Champions League teams.
Oh, right.
So I think they have to qualify for the tournament. So it may not be the top 3, but it's difficult to simulate. So that's why I put the top 3 coefficients in there, because you would assume they'll be the ones to win them. But it feels like they're going to have to play a whole knockout tournament before we get to knockout tournament. These Champions League teams.
And but the first knockout tournament could be more interesting than the actual main tournament.
Yeah,
because it's going to be Champions League teams playing against each other to qualify for it. And then just whoever wins those games going in absolute walking a trophy.
Well, that's the thing. They've replaced because obviously the Europa League teams won't play in the first half of the season. I think there may be one round of 16, depending on how they schedule it. But because they're not having a group stage, instead it would just be loads of qualifiers throughout the first half of the season for teams like PSG and Atletico Madrid, which they should win. Yeah. And then suddenly, why have that rather than a group stage, than an expanded tournament? But yeah, it's an odd one for me. I think it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I don't think it's going to be I think the final and the semi-finals will probably be really good games of football, but until that point, it's going to depend heavily on the draw. And if you get like Rosenborg against the top Champions League team in the first in the round 16, then suddenly it looks even less competitive later in the tournament. So there are some issues. I'll wait and pass further judgment once we see, because I'm sure UEFA will refine this a little before the tournament kicks off next year. I think, I'll wait and reserve judgment until we've seen some games, so we've seen how the competition works, because it may actually be quite interesting to watch. Yeah, Minsk versus I don't know, Farrell Constanta.
Maybe, yeah, that'd be a good game.
But at the moment, wouldn't even qualify because they're winning the Romanian league. They need to be second.
Yeah,
and again, that creates a weird division, because if you are winning your league but want to go and play some guaranteed European football, which is going to make you money, drop off.
I was thinking it's not. That's what makes it even less competitive. It's not even the winners of those smaller divisions. It's the second place and the third place team.
Obviously, first place gives you the chance of qualifying for the Champions League. But I think if you're in the Romanian division, you don't believe really you're going to get through to the Champions League. So second place is going to make you more money, more likely, because you're guaranteed into European.
But even like Rosenborg are the best things. But that's the thing. Even the team, all the teams that get a chance to qualify in the Champions League, it's a very slim chance at that. It's a really slim chance, but yeah, it'd be very interesting.
That's the thing. Rosenborg only look like a good side because they're because the only reason they're in the competition is because they're slightly lower than we would expect them to be in the Norwegian division.
Next year, at the end of this season, they potentially
by the end of the season. I'm only going off of where they're at right now. They may finish second, in which case I think it would be potentially Brann who get knocked down to third, depending on obviously what happens there. So yeah. It only really works if you've got 3 or 4 competitive teams. In Holland, for example, it could be PSV. 20 are currently 4th. If they were in this competition, that's really competitive. So it does depend on the rankings, but it's not going to change. Like the Belgian league isn't going to massively change, and then that be a hugely competitive side. So I do find that some of the decisions are really bizarre. Hopefully, we get a good tournament. But I think when it was first announced, the expectation was we're getting a second-tier competition. It's going to be like Manchester United and PSG and Atletico Madrid and all these teams who haven't qualified for the Champions League in this competition. It's going to be really fun to watch. And I think this is just a bit underwhelming.
Yeah, it is. For me, there's 2 things that are different. And I'm not saying that change is a bad thing, but UEFA have so many competitions that work perfectly and they're brilliant. So why would you change it? Just do exactly what you're doing. what they're doing in the men's game works absolutely fine. The way they're running the UWCL, absolutely fine.
Well, the UWCL moves to a new format next year,
and
as
that's
well,
going to be
of course.
good. So why would you then just? I mean, I don't mind the knockout aspect of it, but why would you change so many aspects of how teams get there and what teams get there, and why is there a two-legged final? But yeah, it's because that's the thing. Even because we're in a position where you look at those teams, it could be PSG versus Utrecht, and Utrecht could put up a really good performance for 90 minutes and fight. But that won't matter because they could get pasted 5-0 in the second leg.
Yeah.
And that's my problem with it.
But also that home and away advantage, because I don't know whether they haven't announced where the final will be. I assume it will just be the home teams have to host.
Yeah.
But that's going to be a huge difference between playing at the Parc de France and playing wherever Utrecht play.
Yeah.
If it is at the Utrecht main stadium, that's still a drop off, but it's still a big ground. If it is the women's side stadium, I'm not sure if they do play at the men's stadium or not, but if it is the women's side stadium, that could be a capacity of a few thousand.
Yeah. And then suddenly you're hosting a Europa Cup final at Meadow Park.
But 1 week it's Meadow Park, the next week it's the Parc de France.
Yeah.
It's going to be weird.
Yeah, it's this really bizarre format. Hopefully, as you say, they refine it, they swap some elements over, and we get a better competition on paper.
But to give it its dues, and this isn't a very UEFA thing to do, it is helping those smaller clubs.
It is.
In European competitions, earn some money and then grow their respective leagues, which I think is a good initiative.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the games between those similar sides will be competitive and will be good.
But are they going to draw the eyes?
Exactly.
That's the question.
Then I don't think they draw much attention. The quality isn't going to be great, and suddenly it's it's still a trophy at the end of the day, but. I'll be intrigued. I'm going to wait and see what happens.
It could also help, it's worth saying, with scouting and stuff like that, because I think teams will be scouting this competition and going, well, WSL teams might go, oh, that link hopping player who we wouldn't normally look at, well, we've just seen them in this European competition, they look really good. And then they're looking around at teams like that. So potentially we see it helps individual players and it helps these clubs. But I think from a fan's perspective, from a viewer's perspective, it's not the most interesting competition.
Yeah, for once, to be fair to UEFA, they favoured the teams over the viewers. Which, as viewers,
normally they don't protest anyone apart from themselves.
Money.
This is a slight difference this time. They're also considering the fans. The only reason they're doing another competition though is so they can make a bit more money.
At the end of the day, it's all about the money.
Yeah, that is UEFA. But I think that's everything we want to say. If you've got some thoughts, get involved in the comment section down below. What do you think of the Women's Europa Cup? Are you as pessimistic as we are, or do you have some reason for optimism? Are you a fan of, say, Minsk, and now you're really excited your team will be in European competition? That is something to consider. For some fans, it's very exciting, but I think from a neutral perspective, not the most exciting competition. But do get involved in the comments below with your thoughts. If you are new, make sure to hit subscribe as well. The WSL's on winter break, so we've got no streams coming up, but we are back at the start of January. And look out for all the content over the next few weeks. That is everything though for today. Thank you guys very, very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.